Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I am just one of your co-hosts, probably the least effective, but I'm here with two much more effective people than I am, and thankfully they carry the show. So welcome Patsy Feeman and Leb Tannenbaum. How are you, sirs?
Well, that intro, we're great.
Well, that's right.
I'm quite well.
Yeah, good. We are back today for another episode with our guest from last episode, Sean Barker. In our last episode, we put Sean on the hot seat to talk about his experiences and wisdom for you, our listener, as CEO. But today, we're putting him on the hot seat as a cloud solutions industry thought leader. So welcome back to the program, Sean Barker, CEO at cloudEQ.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so if you missed our first episode with Sean, make sure you go back and check that out. But today, as I mentioned, we're here to put Sean on the hot seat for industry thought leader in cloud solutions. Let's talk about cloudEQ for a moment and Sean and what makes him an expert in this area. Sean founded cloudEQ in 2019. After successful stops as both an entrepreneur and an executive at various Fortune 500 companies, including COO of Boardwalk Entertainment Group, where he still holds patents, CTO and VP of IT at Ingram Micro, Director of IT at WellPoint Health Networks and Anthem, and Omatis, which was a global consulting firm that ultimately became cloudEQ. So today, we're going to ask Sean to help us address some of the cloud issues keeping you, our listeners, awake at night. Sean, let's start with, I don't know if this is an easy one or if this is a hard one, but how does migrating to the cloud affect the bottom line? What kind of investment might it take, and how long before a CEO can expect to see some ROI?
Well, thank you for the question. You're going to love the answer. And the answer is, it depends.
I figured.
The challenge is, the first thing that we're all sold moving to the cloud is that the cloud saves money. And the answer is it absolutely can, but it doesn't mean it will.
Mm-hmm.
If you turn around and pick up everything you've got and toss it to the cloud and you are expecting to save money, you're probably not going to, until you revamp your processes or right-size the environment or take advantage of cloud-native services that are available, containerization and microservices and platform services and the like. Then you can save a significant amount of money. That said, building the Taj Mahal first and moving into that, transforming into that, is a much longer and expensive process with kind of a delayed ROI. If you pick up what you have and move it and then immediately start optimizing, you could get to some, a break even or even, lower cost. But things like DevOps and SecOps and FinOps, they need to become a part of the culture in order to truly realize the maximum savings and opportunities that the cloud has to offer.
So, and you mentioned DevOps, SecOps, and FinOps. I've got questions on each of them. For the CEO who, maybe the experienced CEO, I'm almost thinking for the inexperienced CEO, the ones that either don't know what those mean or haven't yet moved to the cloud. What are those, and why are they important in a cloud migration?
So, fair question, right? So, DevOps is when you take development and operations and put it together in kind of one team. DevSecOps is when you take development, security, and operations and put that together as one team. If you take FinOps, that's kind of exactly what it sounds like, financial operations. And that's not just let's figure out how we can spend less money. That is institutionalizing budgets and forecasting and spend, which will better help the CFO of the company understand what's going on. But these are all big significant cultural changes within an organization if they don't already have them. But DevOps or DevSecOps as implemented correctly really aids speed to market, right? If you got a fast changing web solution that sells widgets and you want to do promotions and changes and add features and all that sort of stuff, it supports a CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, sort of a pipeline, which lets you move much, much faster in the process. Hope that answers your question.
It does.
So you mentioned security.
Yep.
And I think for those who are less informed, the security piece in making a big decision like this in a huge change management process comes up. And we've had a guest who was in the security business talking about also diversity and the things that make their company great. And yet the challenges are there. Does that come up a lot in the sales process or in the, as a big question that needs to be answered?
Well, yes and no, right? I'll try to stay away from it depends, right? It really is how knowledgeable the decision makers are in that process. Is your CIO familiar with the cloud? Are they experienced and understand what the cloud has to offer? You can make the cloud just as secure as putting it in your basement, if not more. You just have to go about the implementation the right way and ensure the use cases and business objectives, classifying of data, making sure you have roles-based access controls, and an understanding of your governance that gives you the opportunity to implement security in a very strong fashion if you go about the planning the right way.
So I know that you offer your clients a kind of holistic strategy, soup to nuts. There's so many questions in here, and even in the previous interview. So listeners, if you haven't listened to that, I'm going to put in a plug for the episode prior to this, so you'll get to know Sean a little bit better. You talked about knowing the maturity or being aware of the maturity level of your clients. Or how do you get started with a client?
Well, typically we run into an engagement which somebody wants to accomplish something that we do. And through a series of conversations, if they're an existing client, we know their maturity and where they are in the space. And we have clients that are very mature and some that aren't as mature in different spaces. And everybody's in a different space, depending on where you are. If it's a new client, then we spend the time up front to understand what it is what's their business outcome? What are they trying to achieve? And it could be that what they're contacting us for, and we're talking about isn't actually going to achieve the business outcome that they're after, right? So we sit down and we say, you want this and you want this outcome, and you've called us about this solution, but we think that the other solution is actually going to give you the outcome that you're looking for. But we spend time to understand their business, understand their requirements, their goals, their objectives, and to a large extent them as a person. So we can line up their success. Our goal is to make that individual who's responsible for that successful.
Great.
And in turn make the company successful.
Great.
Sean,
thanks.
Again, I'm thinking for the leader who is considering doing this. Is there a threshold in a business where a CEO can expect her or his own IT department to be able to lead and manage and own this, or is and versus engaging an outside partner. And I'll, maybe after this, I want to ask, what should a CEO look for in an external partner? How do I know what the right partner is for me and my business? And I can almost hear you saying, well, it depends. But that first question, is there a threshold? How do I know if my business can handle this internally, or if we really need to engage outside help?
Well, it comes down to internally. The question is, how much experience do you have in the cloud space, right? Do you understand the cloud space and what the cloud space can offer? Are your people internally certified in whatever cloud or clouds you'd like to move to? Do they understand the core principles of DevOps and FinOps and security and all of the rest of that? And then is your company in a position to manage through the organizational or change management that needs to take place? Because it will, in many cases, be disruptive to the business. You can make an attempt to make it as not disruptive or undisruptive as possible, but in some way, shape, or form, it's going to disrupt something. So if your goals and objectives are to launch a new widget by 3 months from now, and you want to kick off a cloud, migration 3 months prior, it's probably not the right time, right? You need to plan it and get to, where is the right time and what do you move and when and why. As for, what do companies look for? What should they look for within a partner? Looking for somebody who's done that, right? Who's been there and done that, for whatever size organization you happen to be, right? We're very fortunate in that we have worked for some of the biggest brands in the industry, and in many cases we have piloted and led organizations through that process, while they have organizations doing some of the technical work that we're quite capable of doing, but they're already engaged to do it. Those organizations have a B after their revenue names, and they're answering to us around process and organizational change management and how to get this done.
So does the organizational change team or person in these large organizations need to be involved? Is it the CTO who's trying to help lead people through this change process?
In most of the organizations that we come across, because they are just enterprise level organizations, right, they have a change management team. And the short answer is one CTO, one VP is not going to change the organization without the change management team underneath them to help dispense and disperse the vision and the direction and the requirements of what it's going to take to go do this. So the short answer is yes, they need to be involved, and yes, if you're starting from scratch, they need to be involved from the beginning.
Got it. Thank you.
Sean, you already mentioned DevOps, DevSecOps, and FinOps. And I could be wrong. I was in my research, in my preparation for this conversation, it seems as though the one that is maybe latest to the party is the FinOps piece, is engaging them. I see you nodding, so that's good.
Yep.
Just kind of asking, making sure. If that's not something that we have considered, how do I begin to implement that in my organization at scale? And is it different from, is cloud FinOps different from just traditional FinOps inside our own organization?
So let me take it, the first one, the last one first.
Yes.
So is it different? Yes, it is different in many cases, right? Because it leverages the cloud, and what the cloud does is offers the flexibility to have elastic compute, right? So if you're in a traditional data center, you spent $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, whatever it is on VM x86 infrastructure, and it doesn't matter how many servers you spin up or turn off, the depreciation is the depreciation, right? Where it's the same is the planning and forecasting of capacity required. And if you happen to do internal chargeback or those components, it's the same, right? If you're going to the cloud, then FinOps really has a significant benefit. And the reason it's latest to the game is because everybody moved to the cloud and said, why does this cost me more money, right?
Right.
So now they came back and said, oh, we got to put in FinOps, right, to figure that out. But you get the advantage of, you can spin up 1,000 servers for an hour and turn them off. You can't do that in a traditional legacy environment. And if you did, you have way too much capacity and you've overbought what you were doing. So it becomes fundamentally different in the cloud. You have, people can abandon servers or storage or all kinds of things that where, again, it doesn't matter in the traditional environment because you paid the money. You're now paying for that resource in the cloud. As to where do you begin? Well, the cliche, right? That which is not measured cannot be managed, right? Mm-hmm. So one should start with measuring what one has, right? We have FinOps tools that measure what's going on. The portals that AWS, Azure, GCP all have basic FinOps. Ours goes a little deeper, but there's also, everybody knows there's 15, 20 players out there that do, to do that. It can be expensive depending on what it is that you want to do and which player you choose. And you can choose a passive approach where it just gives you data versus an active approach where it gives you data and you can take action on that data within that system. So it all depends on what it is that how you see that being accomplished, right? But you got to measure it first, and then you got to make the right decisions for the company.
Sean, is there I know this is too broad of a question, but is there a time frame of something that you tell people up front as you get to know each other that this should take this long before you are really feeling comfortable and the migration is complete and it's working for you?
I think typical migrations depends on the number of systems that are involved, right? I've seen migrations take, 3 months, and migrations take, 5 years, right? It comes down to the complexity of the systems, number one, and number two, the culture of the company doing the migration, right? Mm-hmm. How much again, the technology is not, I won't say it's easy, but it's not the difficult part, right? The difficult part is the organizational change management. How much disruption can the company take? How much training does the company need? How do you get it into the cloud? But all migrations, regardless of size, tend to look like hockey sticks, where for a while you have planning and understanding and adapting culture and organizational change management and testing, and you move stuff and you go through the process and you get the methodology correct for that particular client. And then, after a little bit, you hit stride, right? And I've seen that, like I said, I've seen that little bit take 30 days. I've seen that little bit take a year and a half. Right? It all depends on the company and the appetite.
Sean, you mentioned, sorry, Patsy, go ahead. I'll hold mine.
So I'm hearing two components. One is education. So here's what we're up to, so that the client and you and the client are using the same language. all using the same, familiar with the landscape, all have similar tools or processes. So they know that's kind of like the education, or here's where we're going. It's the how, which relates to an organization's culture, how we do that. That is a really critical component as well. And I know that your organization offers, at least from my perspective, some unique, has a unique offering for helping clients really manage that process, whether it's 3 months or 3 years. You want to talk a little bit about that, about how your employees or your company is, hopefully uniquely placed to help with that integration piece?
Sure. There's a lot of companies out there that do migrations, right? And some of them are very, very good, right? But most of the companies approach it in the same manner of, we got a factory, we're going to put in a list of servers, we're going to right size them, and we're going to just start moving them to the cloud. There is no thought given necessarily to, what is the approach taken for moving this particular server, or the timing. They just plug it in. If it doesn't work, they move it out, put it somewhere else, right? But what that leads to is client abrasion, because they had to move, they didn't want to move, they didn't have enough education, they moved and it didn't work, you right sized it too small. You go through all of these sorts of things, but understanding what the application does, the application owner, the other critical components that go into a business calendar, prior commitments, right, and organizing it in such a way that it's not just tossed into a factory and churned out the other side. While that can be fast, it can cost executives their jobs, because if there's enough client abrasion, doesn't even matter if it went well or saved money or got everybody there. If there's enough abrasion, then, to use quote Wall Street, right, action is taken, confidence is restored, right? So that is, I've seen it too many times that I can't count, right? But if you get it and understand really what they care about, what are their goals, how do you get the client to achieve their goals in the fastest possible way, but with the least abrasion, is really what's critical to that process. Because the cloud needs a reputation. Once you move there, it can get a bad reputation because the migration wasn't handled correctly, even though the cloud is perfectly fine.
Mm.
Sean, the question I was going to ask you earlier, you mentioned a couple of times you've referenced the importance of the culture of the business doing the migration. And I'm drawing the analogy, Patsy Leb and I, as we work with organizations on culture, strategy, execution in those areas, sometimes we figure out an organization just isn't ready, right? They want to be ready, but they're not. And then that either puts things on hold for a while, or we have to just start earlier than we were thinking we were going to start. Are there organizations that as you've engaged with them, they've reached out to you, where you ultimately figure out they're not ready? What are signs? If I'm a listener, how do I know if my organization is ready?
The challenge goes back to business calendar. What else is on your plate? What's a priority for the business? Is the business amenable to this cultural shift and this change, right? Is the culture adaptive, responsive, or is it going to be, for lack of, passive aggressive and fight the change through the whole process? Are you in the middle of a leadership change in mid-tier or upper tier management? If those kinds of things you kind of work your way through. And the last thing that we want is to get an engagement and have a reputation that gets tarnished because the company's not ready, right?
Right.
So we would have that conversation up front, and we'd certainly tell them to go, if need be, go hire somebody else, and then come back to us when it didn't work, and we'll be happy to help, right?
So I'm assuming the CEO needs to be firmly entrenched, like really committed to that work, knowing that there's going to be potential disruption to the organization, right? Somebody can't be waffling on the decision.
Yeah, well, that would be great, right? If the CEO were involved and engaged. Oftentimes, when you deal at the enterprise level, and again, they're talking about numbers that have billion at the end of it, right? That is, it's rare that the CEO gets all that involved in cloud. They will turn to their CIO and say, what are you doing? He says, I'm going to the cloud. He looks at the CFO and says, is that going to save me money? Okay, fine, guys, you do what you need to do, and I still want to achieve my business goals by the next quarter, right? So the CEO is rarely involved. They are aware, right? It's a strategic direction, and if it goes well, they get to stand up and put the flag in the project and say, we saved a bunch of money and we're now in the cloud, and isn't everything great? But the CIO is, the person or the CTO, depending on how the organization is structured, they're the person that need to be all in and committed to achieving it and the organizational change therein.
I have a question. Again, as I was just preparing for today, I've read, and so I'm going to put you on the spot. There is a growing trend of companies migrating back from the cloud to on-premise, and the two primary reasons for that. One was security, right? There's the security breaches. Again, these may not be validity in the reasons, but the two primary reasons were the security concerns and then trouble realizing the ROI, which you alluded to. What advice do you have, what advice would you have for a CEO who's considering pulling back out of the cloud, or wondering out loud, should we bring things back on premise for those or for other reasons?
So I guess what I would so let's take those two reasons first, right? Mm-hmm. Security is not a reason to not move out of the cloud, or to move out of the cloud and bring it back inside, because the security in a data center is largely no better than the security in a cloud, and you can lock down the cloud and make that secure. Mm-hmm. If your goal is to go back to a data center because you haven't been able to achieve the ROI, then I would ask you, have you implemented FinOps? Do you understand what your costs are to begin with? Because chances are, if you bring it back inside, well, yes, you're going to make a big capital purchase and you want to get rid of your OpEx, and that's all lovely. You're still going to pay it in depreciation anyway, right? So either way, you're going to pay for it, and you're probably going to oversize your environment, which means you'll end up paying more money for it. Now, there are legitimate arguments for not doing the cloud per se, right? We've run across a number of private equity firms, right, where they buy a company and they're absolutely willing to invest capital dollars to make the company better, but they're not willing to invest the OpEx dollars, and therefore they spend lots and lots of money in capital and carry the depreciation because the CEO or the people involved in the deal are bonused on EBITDA, right? That's a different conversation with the CFO and with actually the VE or PE company, VC or PE company, to say, hey, listen, your depreciation is actually going to be more than the OpEx would be, and therefore we could work together to make the numbers, the right way. If you have a very, very small footprint that is largely unchanging in the environment, you have, I don't know, a dozen servers, not particularly our client base, but you need all dozen. They run, all out 24/7, 365. You don't do a lot of development. You're not going to change anything. Then, it's probably cheaper to stay on-prem. However, most organizations are going to change stuff. They're going to not have something necessarily, or not have everything 24/7, 365. So there's hibernation. There's a lot of things you can do to do that. And if you want speed to market, you need to be able to stand up and test environments, development environments, and then turn them off. Something you can't do without added capacity in the core infrastructure if you have it on-prem. It's a long-winded way to answer your question. I apologize.
No, it's great. That's great. That's exactly what I was looking for. Leb likes to ask this question, referencing the name of the show, the intent of the show. So it's the Frustrated CEO podcast. What keeps your clients awake at night?
As it relates to migrations or getting into the cloud or being in the cloud, security is always a concern, but it's a concern no matter where you are.
Right.
The other is, financial management. Have we put in the discipline and the process in order to govern this correctly and be able to achieve that return on investment that we had committed to? Did we pick the right cloud? That is a question. And they all three have their benefits and virtues, and we're partnered with all three. Lots of people have multiple cloud environments across vendors. Should I have one? Should I have three? Should I have five? These sorts of questions come up, and we're here to help answer some of those questions depending on what the business needs.
I'm out of questions. Patsy, any other questions before we maybe, as I like to say, I keep saying the same thing every episode, round third and head home for Let's Get Practical. I see a question for me.
No, well, yeah. It's a tag on to what you're just talking about. So for the CEOs listening, what I'm hearing you say, Sean, is find a strong advisor. This is often uncharted territory. And just because you think you're headed one place, the landscape may look different when you get on down the road. So find a strong advisor, know that it's a process, and be willing to adjust your course as need be, depending, as you get new information.
Yeah, anybody, to add on to that, anybody who tells you the cloud is cheaper out of the gate is probably lying to you, right? It can be, and it should be, doesn't mean it is. It doesn't mean you're going to realize that right out of the gate.
Good.
Yep.
All right. Is it time to get practical?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sean, so you know the drill. You were here for our last episode as well. This is the part where we try to give our listeners some practical steps, some key takeaways that she or he can implement in their business to try to, in this case, make inroads in either moving to the cloud or preparing for the cloud, or perhaps seeing the ROI that they have struggled to realize from moving to the cloud, or something else that we haven't talked about. So we'll give you the opportunity to go first. What 2-3 things would you recommend a CEO consider or do to begin moving forward?
So I think if you're not in the cloud today and you're looking to move to the cloud, Patsy said, get a strong advisor, get somebody who's not going to just sell you something and try to get you there. Figure out what works best for your organization. Are you ready to move to the cloud? Is it the right business time to move to the cloud? And then get a partner. Do you have the right technical skill sets, or is a partner going to augment through that process? I would also say, if you're already in the cloud, or even if you're not, FinOps is a key critical component of understanding what your spend is. And if you're not in the cloud, you move there, you can expand that. If you are already in the cloud, measure, and figure out what your action plan is. You're going to spend money. The question is, you don't want to, how much money you got to spend. You don't want to spend any more than you have to, right? You want to focus on spending just what you need to spend to achieve your business outcomes and your business goals. There's kind of two more: DevOps, DevSecOps, right? Put in a DevOps if you've got an environment that changes, that is dynamic, that is repeatable. The process around DevOps is not trivial to implement, but speed to market will be greatly advantaged. Your ability to recover in the event of an outage could also be greatly advantaged. And then I would, one we haven't talked about, right, which is observability, right? So understanding not only, once you've deployed your apps and they're in the cloud and they're doing their thing, how are they working, right, within the code of what they're doing? And then what is your constituency, your user base, whether that's internal or external? What are they using it for, and is it performing the way it should be performing in order to maximize internally your processes, right? Or externally your user and customer experience, although that does apply internally as well. But putting a good observability tool in place, getting the data, being able to represent it in such a way that lines up not only what's the infrastructure doing, what's the application doing, and then lastly, how does that tie out to your key business drivers and delivering on behalf of your client base or customer base for whatever it is you do. Observability is key in that space.
That seems so obvious, and I'm just shocked at how that piece, whether you're doing, cloud digital transformations or something else, just doesn't exist. So
nope.
I appreciate that one.
Patsy, what do you have?
I have that integrating. I put a big digital transition, but it could be a small one. And any digital transition requires being intentional about the process and designing the people piece or the process.
Mm-hmm.
I have spend time up front to get clear about what your organization's goals and desired outcomes are for success. And I think I'll save this next one for you, Patrick. If you don't get it, I'll circle back.
Okay. All right. That's good. So I had a few. Sean, I love the visual. I'm a visual person, so I love the visual. You said a typical migration can look like a hockey stick with a lot of planning, prep, testing. And I'm going to go back when you described it earlier. I'll make sure that gets included, all written out in the Let's Get Practical. But there's a lot of straight line stuff before the actual migration at the end. And I think it's about setting the right expectations. It's going to look like a lot is happening, lots not being done, but it's all happening behind the scenes before we actually see any progress. So I thought that was really helpful. Security concerns are not a valid reason to leave the cloud and go back to an on-premise data center. That security will be no better on site. It actually reminded me of Aaron Warner. He was the data security CEO that we had on a few episodes ago, and he talked about that. He said a lot of times the security in the cloud is better because that if there's a data breach, you're going to lose not just that client, but you're probably going to lose several others in the process. And so you make security your
priority
more than a lot of clients do. And then the change management piece. Change management's a critical part of cloud migration because again, expectations, just understanding it's going to disrupt your business. there have to be the changes in processes, redesigning the processes, revamping the processes. So change management is a crucial part of any migration that if you leave out, will make everything more painful. Patsy, did I get it or did I leave it out?
You didn't.
Oh, what I missed.
You missed. Well, I want to add, technology is not the difficult part. The critical component is the organization's culture and how much disruption they can take throughout the process.
The readiness piece.
That's such a Patrick.
Now,
Let's get
Well,
practical stuff.
I would say, obviously we work to what we can to minimize the disruption.
Yeah.
But, if you're going to paint your house, you can paint it room by room, but there's going to be disruption, right? No matter what you do. Those are the sorts of things that you just need to work through.
Yep. Agreed. Any that we left out that are super important? Sean, any last? No.
I think that like I said, we talked about the organization. Prepare the organization for what's coming, right? It's and if you want to implement, if you're already in the cloud and you want to implement stuff like observability or FinOps, that's stuff you can implement at least at the ground level without massive organizational transformation or awareness, and you can build that up. Kind of the old analogy of you know how to boil a frog. You don't put the frog into hot water, you put the frog into cold water, and then you turn up the heat. So that putting observability or FinOps in, measure, and as you start to make decisions, you can work your way up that ladder, and then do the organizational stuff to line up to what's already there.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and so earlier you mentioned CEOs are not necessarily going to be involved in the migration, but when you talk about readiness, that absolutely is a CEO's role, is communicating to the organization, here's what's coming, here's what's happening, here's and setting those expectations throughout the organization. That helping to create that readiness is a critical component, I think, of a CEO's role. Patsy, anything you wanted to add?
Nope. It's been very inspiring.
Sean, thank you so much. Again, I'm going to ask the same question. If someone is interested in getting in touch with you and wants to either learn more about cloudEQ or is interested in finding out if you are the right partner for them, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I would say, obviously go to the website, you fill out a form, and we'll contact you. By all means, you get on LinkedIn. We've got a presence on LinkedIn, or I've got a presence on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me directly. I think, Patrick, that's how you found me to begin with.
It is.
So,
it worked for me.
Happy to have a conversation.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. Sean, thank you for joining us for 2 episodes. We really appreciate that. Patsy, thank you. Can't thank Leb because he needed to drop off before the end of the episode. But listener, thank you for sticking with us to another episode. The end of another episode. You can find this episode's Let's Get Practical on our website at thefrustratedceo.com. And I think that's it. Sean, any last words? Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And if you got another subject you want to chat about, I'll be happy to do so.
Of course. All right. That sounds like like some foreshadowing. We'll have you.
Yes.
We'll have you on again for sure.
Fair enough.
All right. So we'll see you again next time on the Frustrated CEO podcast.